Welcome to another of my true crime tales, and for this video we're going to head to the north of London and the district of Somers Town, where on the evening of Saturday the 19th of May 1888 a horrible murder took place. The scene of this crime was number 53 Drummond Crescent, one of the many boarding houses that proliferated in the area around Euston and King's Cross railway stations at the time. Today, Drummond Crescent bears virtually no resemblance to how it would have looked at the time, and the house in which the murder occurred has long since been demolished. It was located in the vicinity of Church Way, a narrow, nondescript thoroughfare that connects Drummond Crescent with Charlton Street, which at the time was the scene of a thriving market. The only buildings to have survived from that era are these, situated at the point at which Drummond Crescent became Drummond Street, now Doric Street, alongside Church Way. The year of their construction, 1882, can still be seen emblazoned on an upper exterior wall. The landlord of number 53 was Mr. Joseph Butcher, who occupied the front parlour on the ground floor. He sublet the kitchen of his rooms to Mrs. Salmon and her 28-year-old son, Edward. The back room on the ground floor was rented by cab driver Walter Lee and his wife, Elizabeth. In early January 1888, the Lees had sublet the kitchen of their rooms to Mrs. Mary Newman, who moved in with her two children, Jane, aged 13, and a boy whose name wasn't reported, but who was aged 7 years. The St. Pancras Guardian described the room as a miserable place to live in, containing very little furniture, while the bed and bedclothes were perfectly black. The room was reached via a short flight of stairs that descended from the hall passage into a narrower passage on the opposite side of which was the room rented by the Salmons. Mary, who neighbours described as a quiet and industrious woman, was 48 years old and was the widow of a carman named John Newman, who had been dead for 17 years, by whom she had a daughter named Margaret, who in 1888 was working as a servant and who came to visit her mother very occasionally. 4 or 5 years after her husband's death, Mary Newman had become involved with a younger man named Charles Latham, who was 18 years her junior. The couple lived together on and off right up to Mary's death in May 1888. A few weeks after Mary's arrival at the house, Latham moved in with her, and the two lived together as man and wife. It is not clear whether the children who lived with them were actually Charles's, although they certainly referred to him as father. Mary worked as a laundress, whilst Latham was employed on the stall of Robert Corbett, the self-styled poor man's butcher, located in the Charlton Street Market, 1 street over from Drummond Crescent. He was known by the stallholders and costermongers in the market by the rather unflattering nickname of Nob. Latham was a heavy drinker, and his excessive imbibing led to frequent heated quarrels between he and Mary, one of which in the early hours of the morning of Friday the 27th of April 1888 became so violent that the other lodgers sent for a policeman. The constable who attended the incident was Charles Sheridan, 493Y, and he later described the scene that greeted him.
I was called to 53 Drummond Crescent about 12:40 in the morning. I went down the stairs and there saw the prisoner and Mrs. Newman struggling together. The prisoner was on the top of her. She was bleeding from the left side of the face and mouth. I said, "Will you charge him?" She said, "Yes, I will." He said, "It is all very well." I went out to have a glass of ale, and on my returning I saw a policeman go over the back wall. I cannot go out a moment but there is some man with my wife. She said, "It is false. He does not know what he is talking about." I then took him outside the room. He wanted me to fetch another man from the front kitchen and said, "I want that man taken as well as myself." He said that man had been with his wife. He did not say when. I did not notice that the door of that room had been broken. I took the prisoner to the station. Mrs. Newman was there. She refused to charge him, and he was released. The prisoner seemed to me to be suffering from a severe bout of drinking.
Although Latham returned to number 53, Mary moved out for a time after this incident, and she stayed away for 2 or 3 nights. Left to his own devices, Latham continued drinking heavily and became quite troublesome to other lodgers at the house, in particular to Edward Salmon, who he was convinced was having an affair with Mary. On the 27th of April, prior to being taken to the station, Latham had broken the door to Salmon's room, and going inside, he had said to Edward, "You vagabond, you have been in my room again." Salmon replied that he had not, whereupon Latham left. Later that morning, on Latham's return from the police station, Salmon encountered him in the passage of the house, and he snarled at him, "You vagabond, I mean to do for you before long." Elizabeth Lee was so troubled by Latham's behaviour that she reported her concerns to John Cochrane, the district's relieving officer, and at 11:30 on the morning of Monday the 30th of April, Cochrane, along with registered medical practitioner William James McFarlane, assistant to Dr. Thomas, the parish doctor, arrived at 53 Drummond Crescent to assess Latham's mental state. Entering the back parlour kitchen, the two men found Latham lying on the bed, looking distinctly unwell. "From what I saw of him, I believed he was suffering from delirium tremens," McFarlane later recalled. "I ordered his removal to the workhouse. I wrote out a certificate at the time as suffering from delirium tremens. I only saw him once. I don't think he was the worse for drink that morning, but it was from previous drinking. I came to the conclusion that he was suffering from delirium tremens from his excited look and from the history he gave me. He said he had been drinking heavily lately." At 2:30 that afternoon, Latham arrived at St. Pancras Workhouse, where he was examined by the medical officer, Walter Dunlop. He was then suffering from an attack of delirium tremens produced by excessive drinking, Dunlop later testified. He was excited. I sent him to the insane ward. Latham responded well to treatment and was noticeably quieter the next day, his condition continuing to improve over the course of the next 4 days, and he worked scrubbing the floors of the workhouse and assisting the helpless patients. On Saturday the 5th of May, he asked to be discharged, and since he had shown such encouraging progress, his request was granted, and on Monday the 7th of May, he left the workhouse and returned to 53 Drummond Crescent. However, he soon began drinking again, and in his cups, his animosity towards Edward Salmon continued to fester, boiling over into a violent confrontation at around 6:45 p.m. on Saturday the 12th of May, when, according to Salmon,
"I was coming down Drummond Crescent and Latham came up behind me and gave me a blow in the eye and said, 'Oh, it is you vagabond, is it?' I got up as well as I could and had 3 rounds with him, and he said, 'I would do for you before long.' We fought 3 rounds, and then he went away."
This incident appears to have frightened Mary, and she told Latham to leave, which he did, but a few days later, on the 16th of May, he came back, and Mary allowed him to stay. It was obvious to those around him that Charles Latham was out of control. Elizabeth Lee later stated that she had even heard him sharpening a knife on the house step, muttering to himself, "I will cut her throat." On other occasions, she heard him talking to himself, complaining about policemen getting over the back wall of the house. Even the stallholders in the Charlton Street Market were commenting on his odd behaviour, with several of them questioning whether the workhouse authorities should have discharged him, as it was obvious to them that he was dangerous. Just how dangerous was to become tragically apparent on the evening of Saturday the 19th of May. Having spent the day working on the market stall, he returned home at around 5 o'clock. Mary, who had herself been working that day, arrived home around the same time, and the two were seen entering the house together by several of the lodgers. Shortly afterwards, he knocked on Elizabeth Lee's door and asked her if she had seen his brother Charlie.
I said no. He seemed to think I had him concealed somewhere. He seemed quite strange that afternoon. His own name is Charlie.
Having returned to his room, he stood with his back to the fire. Their daughter Jane later recalled what followed.
"My mother was sitting in a chair. They were not talking at all. Nothing was said by either of them. Then father took the knife off the dresser. It was a black-handled one. It was one of the knives in use at meals. He put the knife across Mother's throat while she was sitting on the chair. Mother hallooed out, 'Don't do it!'
The girl fled the room in terror. Elizabeth Lee later recalled what happened next.
About 7, I was in my room. As I was going from one room to the other, I saw the girl Jane Newman crying in the passage. In consequence of what she said, I went down to their room. The door was shut. On going in, I saw Mrs. Newman lying on the bed, bleeding, and Latham with his right hand under her head and his left hand at her throat. He had something in his hand, but the palm of his hand hid the handle. But I am certain it was a knife. Mary said, "Mrs. Lee, he is killing me." I caught hold of the collar of his coat and said, "You murderous villain, you are killing her." He turned round and looked very strange at me. He did not say a word. He had something in his hand and was digging at her throat. I tried to pull him off her, but could not, and I ran upstairs and called Mr. Butcher.
Joseph Butcher continued with the story.
Mrs. Lee came into the parlour and told me to run downstairs instantly. I did so and went into the room. Mr. Mulford followed me down. He was in the room with me. The door was wide open. Directly I went in, I saw Mary Newman was lying across the bed. Latham was kneeling with his right knee on her stomach and his left foot on the floor, and he was digging away at her throat with his right hand. I could not see whether he had anything in his hand. It seemed to me as if he had made the wound and he had got his fingers in trying to tear it open. I at once laid hold of him by the back of the neck. I could not pull him off by myself. He was too heavy for me. Mulford came into the room at the same time, and he assisted me, and we pulled him off of her. Neither of us spoke to him. When we pulled him off, she got up off the bed. I saw that she was bleeding from the throat. Latham was struggling with me. The female went out at the door. I fell against something, and Latham got away from me, and I saw nothing more of him. When I got upstairs, I found Mrs. Newman in my room, sitting on a chair.
Butcher and the other lodgers tried to stem the bleeding as best they could using pieces of cloth, but it was obvious to all present that her injuries were serious. "I know he has killed me," were the only words the victim uttered. Latham had calmly walked out of the house and had headed down Churchway into Charlton Street, where he stood for a short time in front of Corbett's meat stall before he turned and headed towards the Coffee House Tavern. Elizabeth Lee, meanwhile, had gone for the police, and finding Constable John Kelly, Y285, she breathlessly blurted out what had happened. The officer later recalled that,
About 7:30, Mrs. Lee spoke to me, and I went to 53 Drummond Crescent and saw Mary Newman in Butcher's room, sitting on a chair. I sent for a doctor and then went in search of Latham. He was pointed out to me by Mrs. Lee as he was entering the Coffee House public house, about 400 yards from 53 Drummond Crescent. I followed him in and saw him standing at the counter. I noticed that both his hands were covered with blood. I told him I should take him into custody for violently assaulting his wife. He replied, "Yes, all right." I took him to the station. He there made a statement which Inspector Palmer took down in writing. He appeared to me to be perfectly sober. He walked all right to the station, quite steadily, without any stagger or falter whatever. On the way he said, "Let go my arm. I will walk quietly."
At 20 minutes to 8, local medic Dr. John Murray Llewellyn of 32 Charlton Street arrived at the house.
"I found the woman in a chair in the front parlour. She was in a dying condition. I counted 9 wounds on her neck and face, one of which had laid bare her jaw on the right side, and another that had half severed the internal jugular. The other wounds were more superficial. There were 2 wounds on the right hand between the thumb and forefinger, and one on the left that would be from her catching hold of the knife to defend herself."
Having bandaged the wounds, Llewellyn ordered her immediate removal to University College Hospital on Gower Street, and Police Constable George Patton, having brought a cab to the house, went with her to the hospital, later recalling that she said nothing during the journey. On arrival at the University College Hospital, she was seen by house surgeon Sidney Holder, but by this time she had lost so much blood that there was little he could do, other than try and make her final moments as comfortable as possible.
She was very pale, even to the lips, and the pulse was imperceptible. I got an ounce of brandy down her throat. She was just on the point of death and died at 8 o'clock. I made a post-mortem examination. The largest wound went behind the gullet and scratched the vertebra.
Some idea of the ferocity of the crime can be gleaned from Holder's recollection that during the examination he found the point of the knife which fitted the wounds and which had broken off during the attack just under her left breast, lying on her skin. With their mother dead and their father about to be charged with her murder, the couple's 2 children were taken to St. Pancras Workhouse. Charles Latham and Constable Kelly, meanwhile, had arrived at the police station in Platt Street, where they were met by Inspector Charles Austin.
I asked what the charge was.
Austin later testified.
Kelly said, for cutting his wife's throat with a knife. The prisoner said, yes, for cutting my wife's throat with a knife. I searched him and told him I should have to detain him. He appeared to be very strange in his manner. He rolled his eyes about, and he was very flushed. He did not appear to be under the influence of drink then. I hardly knew what to make of him when he came in. He seemed rather strange. He never spoke. It was from his look, and he seemed to throw himself about very loosely. I did not know at the time whether it might be the effects of drink or not. I sent for the divisional surgeon, Dr. Thompson.
Austin then hurried round to 53 Drummond Crescent.
I went down to the bedroom. It was in disorder. The bedding was all rolled up on the bedstead. I found a table knife doubled up between a pillow on the floor. It had on it marks of blood and hair, and about an inch of the point was broken off. There were 3 separate pools of blood on the floor. I heard that the woman had been taken to the hospital. I went to the hospital and found that she was dead.
Back at the police station in Platt Street, John Thompson, the divisional police surgeon, had examined Latham.
From his appearance and conversation, I was of the opinion he had been drinking that day. I asked him whether he had, and he replied that he had, but not very much. He said he might have had about 10 half-pints of ale that evening. I said, what else? He said he did not remember that he had anything else but ale. I said, perhaps it might have been a little more than that. He said, well, I could not tell. It might have been. His breath was very offensive, as if he had been drinking. His eyeballs were congested. The conjunctiva covering the eyeballs were red. His face looked bloated, and he sat there apparently not at all concerned or feeling the position he was placed in. I said, are you aware what you are charged with? He said, yes, but I could not help giving it to her, for she was always nagging at me.
Moments later, Inspector Austin arrived and informed Latham that he was about to be charged with the willful murder of Mary Newman. Inspector Palmer then read over the charge and cautioned Latham that
any statement you might wish to make will be taken down by me and might be used in evidence against you.
Latham then commenced making a long and rambling statement which Palmer wrote down.
I had cause. I could not go outside my place without the man who lives in the next room was in my room with my missus. I could not go to bed without this man getting in at the window. I have heard that they have chloroformed me and taken liberties with me, but I know nothing about it. Mr. Dodd and Cobb, I have heard that they have taken a liberty with me, and have had my missus all over the place. On Saturday night in Mr. Lee's room, along with Mrs. Lee, I was took queer. One night I went to the hospital after the house was shut. I told my missus to lock the door. I tried it, and it was locked. I came back to my room. My room was open, and this chap ran out into the front kitchen. A night after that, I went to have half a pint of ale at the coffee house. I was not above 5 minutes gone. I came back. My door was open. I saw a constable jump over the yard wall next to where I live. I hit my missus and asked her what she had done such things for. I then went out and heard her hallooing down the cab yard, "Let me be, there is my husband." I know Inspector Dodd and Sergeant Cobb quite well. They both belonged to the Criminal Investigation Department at that time.
Palmer then read the statement back to him, and Latham, having agreed it was correct, signed it. On Monday the 21st of May, a large crowd gathered outside Platt Street Police Station to witness Latham being taken to the police court. However, as the St. Pancras Guardian reported, they were disappointed, for after partaking of a hearty breakfast of tea, bread and butter and haddock, he was conveyed to the police court in a cab. He was quite unconcerned and did not seem to realise his awful situation in the slightest degree. On being brought into the court and charged with the wilful murder of Mary Newman, he stood upright and looked straight before him. He was evidently paying attention to the evidence and corrected one witness's statement. The jailer asked Mr. Bross the magistrate's consent for the prisoner's immediate removal to jail, as it was thought he was insane, and permission being granted, Latham was remanded and was then transported to Holloway Prison, where he spent his first few weeks there in the infirmary under the supervision of prison surgeon Philip Francis Gilbert. On the afternoon of Wednesday the 23rd of May, Dr. Danford Thomas, coroner for Central Middlesex, opened the inquest into Mary Newman's death at the St. Pancras Coroner's Court. The first witness was Margaret Newman, Mary's eldest daughter, who testified to having last seen her mother 2 weeks ago. Next up was Elizabeth Lee, who gave an account of the weeks leading up to the murder and of the events on the night itself. Other lodgers were then called as witnesses, and they were followed by the police constables who had attended the scene, as well as Inspectors Austin and Palmer, followed by Doctors Llewellyn and Holder. The final witness was 13-year-old Jane Newman, who recounted the initial moments of the murder and testified that her mother wasn't on the bed but was sitting in the chair when she had fled the room. Following the coroner's summing up, the foreman of the jury, Mr. Robertson, remarked that they would like to hear from the doctor at the workhouse, who could testify as to Latham's state of mind when he was discharged. The coroner replied that, although it wasn't for the jury to inquire into Latham's state of mind, once they had given their verdict, the doctor would be called. The jury therefore returned a verdict of wilful murder against Charles Latham, after which Dr. Stullock, medical officer at the St. Pancras Workhouse, gave a brief account of Latham's time there.
He was admitted to the house on the 30th of April on a medical certificate certifying that he was suffering from delirium tremens. He remained in the house until the 7th of May, during which time he was under my care. He improved very much. He was suffering from drink, and he said himself that he had been drinking. After the first day, he was put to scrubbing and was allowed outdoor exercise. He seemed to recover. He was discharged on the 7th of May when his brother came for him. We could not have detained him. He appeared rational after the first night.
Having told the court that Latham might have delirium tremens again at any time if he took to drink, the doctor then stated that Latham had been given a glass of beer for his dinner. However, both he and Dr. Dunlop were of the opinion that Latham was cured and had therefore agreed to his release. With the inquest over, Mary Newman could be laid to rest, and at 2:30 on the afternoon of Thursday the 24th of May, her coffin was carried out of her sister's house in Hampton Street for her final journey to the cemetery. For quite an hour before the melancholy cortege assembled, the St. Pancras Guardian reported, crowds of people thronged the street and adjoining thoroughfares, and when the oak coffin, which was covered with wreaths, was brought out and placed on a handsome open car provided, several women sobbed aloud, touching the coffin with their fingers as it passed them. The mourners filled 2 coaches and a cab. The interment took place at Finchley, the funeral arrangements being in the hands of Mr. Slade of Drummond Street. Charles Latham made several further appearances at the Clerkenwell Police Court, the final one being on Tuesday the 5th of June, when the magistrate, Mr. Bross, ordered him to stand trial at the Central Criminal Court for the wilful murder of Mary Newman. His Old Bailey trial began on Monday the 2nd of July. The witnesses who had testified at the inquest and the police court were all called to give evidence. Since there was a consensus that jealousy was the motive for the crime, those whom Latham had accused of being involved with Mary, Edward Salmon, Police Inspector Charles Dodd, and Police Constable Frederick Cobb, were all quizzed as to the truth of the allegation. Edward Salmon stated that there had been no impropriety between him and the murdered woman, and the police officers both testified that although they were familiar with Latham because of his behaviour, they didn't even know Mary. The main thrust of the defence was whether Charles Latham had been sane when he had committed the murder. To that end, Philip Francis Gilbert, the surgeon at Holloway Prison, was questioned as to Latham's state of mind, and he testified that he was then in his right mind to a great extent, and to some extent not. He was certainly suffering from delusions, and was still convinced that he saw a man jumping over the wall of the house. He was still hearing voices. In the doctor's opinion, the delusion that some man had intimacy with the woman probably induced him to revenge himself upon her. He would have known that he was killing her, and he would have known that what he was doing was wrong, but he would be insane because of the delusions. Henry Charlton Bastian, physician to the University College Hospital and to the Hospital for the Paralysed and Epileptic, had been asked by the Home Secretary to see the prisoner in Holloway Jail and report on his mental condition. He testified that he had had a long conversation with Latham, and he seemed to be suffering from hallucinations of sight and hearing. He thought that he heard voices when he was in bed, calling out in the yard. Also voices calling to him in the street. Also that he had seen men running in and out of his room, partly through the door and partly through the window. that he saw a policeman going out through the window. He also had certain delusions relating to the hallucinations with regard to this woman. His delusions were fancies that the woman had been having connection with the man Salmon, the policeman, and many others. In Bastian's opinion, all these things were the result of long, continued, excessive drinking. Following Bastian's testimony, the judge summed up, and the jury retired to consider their verdict. On returning, they found Charles Latham guilty of the murder of Mary Newman, but being insane at the time he committed the act. The judge duly ordered him to be detained during Her Majesty's pleasure. He was taken to Broadmoor Hospital, where he spent the next 46 years, dying there of natural causes on the 29th of March 1934 at the age of 76. And thus the curtain came down on yet another senseless tragedy in London. An innocent woman was dead and her children orphaned. There had been a spate of such murders that year, and the newspapers had begun opining that a murder epidemic was sweeping the nation's capital, and headlines to that effect were appearing across the country. According to the Southern Reporter, there has recently been an unusual crop of those comparatively commonplace murders and murderous assaults, which are all times occurring, more or less through the domestic quarrels of married or unmarried couples. The almost daily killing of a wife or paramour in the great metropolis seems indeed to excite little sensation among the inhabitants. They appear to look upon this state of things as matter of course. Little did they realize that within a few months another killer would step from the shadows and orchestrate a campaign of terror in the East End of London, so brutal and so horrific that by the end of 1888 many would believe that the epidemic of murder had become a pandemic. I hope you found this video interesting. If you have, please be sure to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. It really does help. I'd be delighted to see your observations in the comment sections below, as you may well have spotted something that I've missed. Thanks for watching, and until we meet again in the dark and mysterious labyrinth of Victorian London's true crime underworld, stay safe.